Nile Gardiner, director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, a friend of mine, former colleague when I was at Heritage. We're really excited to have you join us and share your thoughts on some of the events that we're seeing unfold on the global stage right now. Now, I wanted to kick it off first and focus in a little bit on China and the threat we face in China. And we just got, this is a good question for you, given your background with the UK. We just got great news out of the UK that they're going to move away from the deal they had with Huawei. And that was something that we here in America were concerned about for a while. They made the wrong call up front, but they got it right eventually. Give us your perspective on that. Why do you think they got it right? And how important is this issue to countering China?
Well, Tim, thanks very much for interviewing me today, and it's a great pleasure to speak to Stand for America. Thank you for all of the work that you do, and thank you very much as well for Ambassador Haley's leadership. And she reminds me actually a lot of Margaret Thatcher, a leader who stands like a rock on conservative principles, who is not afraid to stand up for conservative ideals and principles. And so very grateful for Nikki Haley's leadership in America at this crucially important time. And China is such a huge issue, of course, for both the United States and for the United Kingdom. And earlier this year, the British government made a stunningly bad decision to allow Huawei a 35% stake in the UK's 5G network. And so this was back in January. Huawei is China's biggest technology company. It has a huge role already, not only in the UK, but across much of Europe as well. And just last week, the British government did a huge reversal, basically announcing that Huawei would be phased out of the UK's 5G network by 2027. And this was a stunning strategic blow for China, because Huawei is so hugely important to the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, Huawei is an extension of the Chinese state, very closely aligned with the Communist Party's leadership. And the British decision by Prime Minister Boris Johnson certainly was a massive game changer, not only for the UK, but for the whole of Europe as well, with huge implications, I think, for the whole of Europe. And basically, Boris Johnson gave Huawei the boot. And this was a result of sustained US pressure, but also, of course, a large-scale parliamentary rebellion by conservatives in the House of Commons, led by Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. And these conservative rebels basically warned the government that they would overturn legislation if the government decided to move forward on the Huawei front. And so the government listened to both US concerns as well as the concerns expressed within the Conservative Party as well. And also the government was acutely aware, of course, of growing Chinese aggression over Hong Kong, China's appalling response to the COVID-19 pandemic. All of these factors created a perfect storm, which influenced the Prime Minister basically to do a U-turn on Huawei, to kick Huawei out. And so this is a very important decision by the British government. And it's my hope that the removal of Huawei from the UK 5G network can be accelerated in the course of the next few years. So hopefully we can get Huawei out at a much quicker stage than 2027.
Yeah, it is super important, and it's hard to do. I mean, they've kind of embedded themselves even in some areas here in the United States, and it's, you know, it costs money and it's infrastructure, and you've got to move it fast. So, but yes, I hope it is accelerated. I want to get to Hong Kong in just a second, as you mentioned there. But before we go there, I'd like you to just talk a little bit more about the kind of dynamics that were taking place in British politics around this. You mentioned that it was the Conservatives that made it clear that they were going to rebel against the decision. What was it for the Liberals that was enticing about going down this road?
Well, I think the initial decision made by the British government was based upon decades of allowing Huawei a stake in the UK telecommunications market. So you have to go back to the days of Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown nearly 2 decades ago, when Huawei was initially introduced into the UK telecommunications market. And so basically Boris Johnson just continued existing, government policy with the decision that was made back in January. And also you had big business interests in the UK, especially telecommunications companies, who are actively lobbying the British government over the Huawei decision. And also the fact that Huawei has a huge edge in terms of 5G technology. This was a big factor in the initial British government decision to go with Huawei. The fact that Huawei offered 5G at an accelerated pace ahead of its competitors, such as Nokia, for example. And so the British government wanted to save a lot of money by going with Huawei. So there are many factors in play here. But thankfully, the British government woke up to the fact that Huawei poses a significant national security risk to the United Kingdom. And the Trump administration certainly sent multiple signals to the UK that this was a very dangerous decision. And also the Heritage Foundation, we also strongly advised Downing Street and British government officials against going down the Huawei route, because we saw it really as a fundamentally dangerous decision. And so fortunately, the government has reversed track. And, I have to give Boris Johnson credit here for having the guts to say that the British government was wrong on this. And he has basically done, a complete U-turn on this. And by doing so, he is protecting British national security, protecting British interests. He's also, I think, ensuring that the US-UK special relationship can be fundamentally strong, that it's not divided at all, because there was a rift over this particular issue involving Huawei. And now we have the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, traveling to London this week, meeting with the Prime Minister, and the White House and the State Department are sending the clear message to the United Kingdom that the British government's reversal is hugely welcomed by the United States. This is the right course to go, and it's great news as well for the US-UK partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. You mentioned Hong Kong, and there were reports out over the last day or two that the UK may be ripping up its extradition treaty with Hong Kong in response to the human rights abuses that we've seen from the communist government in China. Talk about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the UK is significantly toughening its stance on Hong Kong. And clearly, the Chinese government is trampling upon the rights of the people of Hong Kong. The new national security law that China has imposed upon Hong Kong is a draconian, dictatorial law that completely violates the Sino-British Declaration of 1984. And so China's government has demonstrated it has no regard whatsoever for an internationally recognized agreement here. China has no respect for international law. China has no respect for the human rights of the people of Hong Kong. And so the British response has been very strong, it's been very tough. The UK has, just in the past 2 weeks, offered up to 3 million Hong Kongers the right to move to the United Kingdom and eventually to become British citizens as well. So this is a huge gesture by the United Kingdom. I'm sure that many residents of Hong Kong will take up that offer and will move to the United Kingdom. And the UK has sent a very clear message to China's communist government that Britain will not tolerate China's actions. And this is just the opening salvo from the United Kingdom against China. And there can be zero tolerance for China's actions. There must be no tolerance whatsoever for what China is doing with regard to Hong Kong. And the US and the UK can stand together as the leaders of the free world against China's aggression and standing with the people of Hong Kong who are fighting for their freedom. Protesters on the streets of Hong Kong are flying the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes.
Yep.
They know that the US and the UK has their backs, and they are looking to the US and the UK to stand with them in their fight for freedom.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Pompeo. We know he's headed to London this week, and one of the central focuses will be the U.S. UK trade deal. Talk about why this trade deal is so important, why it needs to get done now.
Yeah, so Secretary Pompeo is meeting with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, also with the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, as well as leading members of the Conservative Party as well. And a key focus of his visit will be the US UK free trade negotiations. And over the past few weeks, US and British negotiators have been negotiating a very significant, highly important, large scale trade deal between the United States and the United Kingdom, between the world's largest and fifth largest economies. And with Britain leaving the EU single market and the EU customs union at the end of this year, the UK will be able to implement free trade agreements with countries across the world. And the proposed trade deal with the United States will be a force generator for economic freedom, for job creation, for prosperity on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's a win-win deal for the United Kingdom and for the United States. And let's not forget that over 1 million Americans are employed at the moment by British companies. Over 1 million Britons are employed by American companies. And so there's a huge economic stake that the US has in the UK and vice versa. And this trade deal will create many, many more jobs for Americans and for Britons as well. It's going to be great for trade, for investment. It's going to be great as well for the US-UK special relationship, because the Anglo-American special relationship really is the beating heart of the free world. And this trade deal certainly will further enhance and strengthen what is already the greatest partnership today in the world.
So put on your prognosticator hat. Do you think they can get it done before the election?
Well, I think that a trade deal can be certainly concluded between London and Washington ahead of the November presidential election. It would then have to be implemented in 2021.
Right.
But I believe that the deal can be certainly negotiated and effectively signed before the presidential election. And so I do think that the political will on both sides of the Atlantic to get this deal done. It's in the interest of both the US and the UK to have this deal in place as soon as possible.
Wonderful. Well, let's hope. Okay. Well, Nile, lastly, I wanted to ask you, we see over your shoulder there a picture of you with Margaret Thatcher. And you had a wonderful, really kind of cool job working with Margaret Thatcher. I'd like you to just kind of share some of your observations about her leadership style. And I'd like you to actually, let's move away for just a moment from foreign policy. And I wonder your thoughts about how she might deal with the cancel culture crisis that we are dealing with here in the United States today and what we're seeing unfolding on the streets.
Well, those are great questions, Tim. And frankly, Margaret Thatcher would have cancelled cancel culture. She would have stood up to the far left bullies, the Marxists, who are trying to destroy freedom of speech, not only, of course, at the moment in the US, but also in the United Kingdom as well. And so, Margaret Thatcher would have fought tooth and nail against the Marxists who seek the destruction, frankly, of Western civilization altogether. And, we have to really stand and fight against this far left tide, because the left seeks to destroy everything that the United States and Great Britain stand for. They seek to destroy the very foundations of our democracy. And Margaret Thatcher would have stood up to the far left mob. She would have confronted them, challenged them, and she would have emphatically defeated them as well. And she would have ensured that no statues were being torn down. She would have ensured that the violent anarchist mob would be dealt with by law enforcement. And she would ensure that all of those responsible for the destruction of property, for the anarchy that we're witnessing on the streets in both the US and the UK, that they would be held to account. Margaret Thatcher believed in the rule of law. She believed in defending and protecting our history and our institutions. And she, in many times throughout her time as prime minister, had to confront violent mobs, rioting, public disorder, and she always prevailed because it was her view that the forces of law and order, the forces of freedom, must always prevail against the forces of anarchy, of disorder, against those who seek the destruction of our free society that we cherish so deeply. So Margaret Thatcher would have been a great warrior today in terms of confronting the immense challenges that we are facing today. And I do think that Margaret Thatcher was and remains for us today a huge shining example of conservative leadership in the face of adversity. And Margaret Thatcher emphatically defeated socialism in Great Britain back in the 1980s. And socialism brought the British people literally to their knees. And she defeated socialism, and she vowed that socialism would never rise again in the United Kingdom. And how right she was, because we have not seen socialism rising again in the United Kingdom. We now have a very strong, powerful conservative government in place. We have Brexit in place, and Margaret Thatcher was a big believer in Brexit, and she would have mightily cheered Britain's exit from the European Union. In fact, she was the first British politician to call for the UK to leave the EU. So she would have been greatly delighted and cheered by the advent of Brexit, which is a great moment in British history and a great moment in freedom for Britain and for the world.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, you're absolutely right. She is a shining example of what leadership looks like, and it's our job to ensure that that example is seen today. And we need that kind of leadership from all of our politicians right now. So thank you for sharing that. And Nile, thank you for sharing some time with us. These insights have been wonderful. We very much appreciate it. We'll continue to work alongside you and your colleagues in promoting these ideas. And we really appreciate the time. So
it's my pleasure. Thank you very much, Tim.